Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is episode 62 of Changing the Face of Yoga, and my guest is Charlotta Martinez, who will be discussing yoga for teenagers and all of the kinds of research that she's involved in for teenagers in the Mideast, Africa. Let's listen. Hello, this is Stephanie Cunningham with Changing the Face of Yoga, and I'm talking to Charlotta Martinez today. And she has some fascinating information about teen yoga and has extensive experience in it. Charlotta was a secondary and primary school teacher in the UK and Sweden. And then she decided to be a yoga teacher in the Shivananda tradition, and then a yoga therapist for mental health. She runs the Teen Yoga Foundation, which has been in operation since 2003 and became a charity in 2016. She is a consultant to government on education through the All-Party Parliamentary Group, specifically on yoga and yoga on schools. She's also involved in a 2-year research project with the European Union, measuring the impact of yoga on young people in 5 countries. And we'll certainly talk about that some more. She has a new book out, Teen Yoga. It should be out in August in the US and the UK. And she believes that yoga is the key to unlock a peaceful future. And our young people are the ambassadors for that peace. Welcome, Charlotta. Could you tell me if there's anything else you'd like to add to that introduction?
I think it's pretty thorough. I always feel there's stuff going on that, it's hard to give an accurate vision of exactly everything that's happening. But I guess the other things that are quite exciting is both Westminster University and Sheffield University are researching the impact of yoga on young people. And I also present on the BBC on a regular basis on yoga for young people and the kind of yoga philosophy as well as it applies to our life. And we're in the process of building an app for young people to access yoga in a more accessible way. Those are the things I'd like to say.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about this 2-year project, and you have it called Hippocampus.eu. It's with the European Union, and it's measuring the impact of yoga on young people in 5 countries. And you say that they're in different contexts, which means young asylum seekers and refugees are also included. Is there anything that's come out of that yet that you can share with us, or you could just explain how?
Sure. I mean, we've done the inception of the project, so we're 6 months down the line. I'd say that what's starting to happen, I mean, the design of the project is beautiful in the sense that we are not only targeting the young people, but we're also working with the professionals who work with the young people so that it's a kind of sustainable intervention, so that we're training up school teachers, youth workers, refugee workers to use yoga with their young people to help them through trauma or through difficult times, or just to be able to help them focus a little bit better in school or overcome disadvantage. And what's been interesting about that is that we weren't sure how much interest we would have from the adults in this intervention, but the interest has been much greater, and the adherence to the intervention has been much greater than we expected, so that we've had 100% adherence to the course that they have to take. So it's been a kind of enforced yoga class, but the adults that have had to come have really enjoyed it, and that's been something very reassuring, because obviously if they enjoy it, then they're empowered to share stuff that they learn in the class, on a continuous basis, day to day, because they have the day-to-day connection with the young people, whereas the yoga teachers only see them once a week for maybe 10 weeks. So that aspect has proved to be very powerful, actually.
And do these teenagers who, like the refugees, are they open to the yoga also?
We have just started working with the refugees. That's just coming now this summer. That's in Italy. They're mostly from African countries. The Syrians, we found, have been very optimistic and open about it. Those with a Muslim background have certain reservations, which we're interested in looking at, but we're used to working with Muslims in the UAE and Dubai, so we have certain strategies to make the yoga work for a Muslim community. So we're implementing those strategies and finding that that's that's going to be something we can easily overcome. But at the moment, that the asylum seeker is just at its stage. We're just starting that project in Italy now. That hasn't really been going for very long. We will want to report later on in the year, I should think, on that one.
All right, good. Can you share a little bit about how you are sensitive to the Muslims when they're in a yoga class?
Sure. I mean, it's been such an honor, real blessing and honor for me to be working in the UAE now. In its third year, I go every year to teach a group of Muslim women, predominantly Muslim women, but also international women, how to share yoga. And I've always been a bit fascinated and curious as to what the interface is between Islam and yoga, because there is obviously a lot of fear around yoga being a religion, and this kind of misunderstanding is quite prevalent and really builds quite big obstacles for a lot of people to come to yoga. But what I found is, with these very devout Muslim women in UAE, they said with one voice very clearly that they felt that their yoga practice actually brought them closer to their religion. And they felt that it made them even more, they understood their religion more, they understood the connection with God more, and they understood their connection with faith through their practice of the yoga. And in fact, one woman who will be speaking at our conference later on this year will be coming over from the UAE to discuss how she plans to implement yoga for the young men in the UAE who are tempted to go towards a more kind of extremist kind of Muslim view, just to bring them more into a peaceful place, which is a very exciting transition.
That has really far-reaching impacts. Congratulations on that kind of outcome. That's great.
I think just on a more practical level, it might be interesting for people to hear that obviously we work with single gender, so we don't mix the genders in Muslim countries, and I think that's something that's very powerful, because if you've ever been in a group of Muslim women together, it's a joyful, very intimate experience of being with women together in a very kind of open environment, and it's very supportive of true yoga practice, where we can go deep into our emotions and deep into our transformation. And similarly, I think men together would be a similar experience. And so that's a key element of introducing yoga in Islam communities, is to keep the genders separate, and then also obviously to allow them to express how this yoga might challenge them, or how it might support them in their own faith, which is so key and so central to their lives. And you'll find some very interesting responses and very kind of supportive responses. The asanas themselves, very similar to the praying. Go into their mosque and pray, that the kneeling and the coming into the prayers is very, very similar to the sun salutation, for example. And they say that this is what we learn in mosque, this movement. And also a lot of the other elements of the breathing and so on is also something they've learned in mosque. So it's not something that's strange to them. In fact, it enhances their experience.
Oh my goodness, I had no idea. I learned a lot there. My goodness. I wanted to just take a little side issue here. I read your website and what you've given me, and I noticed that, and I understand that you are trained in the mental health area in yoga therapy, so it may be that that's your interest, but you talked a lot about the pressures and the stresses of being a teenager. And are you saying that it is quite a problem where you're working? I can certainly understand it with refugees and asylum seekers, but just the general population, there's a lot of stress for teenagers there?
Yeah, I mean, I started teaching young people in 1983. I have the perspective of, 35 years now. And to see the difference between now and then is quite extraordinary. And we often discuss it among us with other professionals working with young people, so psychologists, pediatricians, and other educators. And I think it is 100%, anecdotally, it's absolutely considered to be a different world today. But also, the research is showing us that in the UK, something like 1 in 5 14 to 17-year-olds have a diagnosable mental health issue.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we have an issue. Yeah. And, suicide among young men has risen, and it's to horrendous proportions that's never been seen before. And it's the highest, it's the biggest reason for death under 21 among men is suicide.
Do you or any of this research that you've uncovered give any kind of reasons for that?
Well, there's emerging evidence that social media is impacting mental health, and the fact that we are very much living kind of outside of ourselves, as it were. So we're living in a world which is virtual world and not a real world. We're living in a world where we are constantly being asked to present ourselves in a particular way. So Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. The pressure of that, it just feeds into a natural pressure at adolescence anyway, of wanting to belong and wanting to create a persona in society. And so that exacerbates that need to belong, and it kind of pushes it over the edge and brings people outside of themselves, where really naturally it is a time also to be deep, diving deep inside and asking, what is the point of my life? Where am I going? What is the reason for living? These two kind of streams are really crashing and imploding. The desire to belong and this need to be showing oneself on social media, matched with a kind of sense of despair and sense of despondency in terms of what is the point of my life. And then, of course, we have the economic and the social issues that are happening globally, which are so much more available to us on a minute-by-minute basis in terms of news, and in a way that it's never been before. So we are acutely aware of suffering around the globe, and a lot of young people are very empathic, incredibly empathic and very sensitive to this kind of suffering, and haven't yet developed the hard skin that maybe adults might have developed through exposure. And I think, it's dangerous to kind of theorize around it, but just looking at research, that's definitely something. There was an article in The Economist only last week kind of showing some of the latest research in the impact of social media on mental health, and that corroborates what I've just been saying. Yeah. So that's probably one of the main issues I think that has changed between now and 35 years ago, I'd say.
Okay, and so when we bring yoga to these teenagers, obviously we're trying to get into the body and really have them understand and know their own body. And is this kind of another way for them to think about their teenage years?
That's a key, core question, is what is it about yoga that would help them with this particular issue? And I think for me, when we have these group discussions in all the courses that I run with psychologists, psychiatrists, pediatricians, what comes up is this absolute abject fear among young people of being alone, of being left alone, being alone, not belonging. And a yoga class in its best way really allows us to be alone together. If we're creating a yoga class which creates safety and silence, and we're moving in space together, and we're breathing together, but we're doing it in silence. We're being invited into ourselves in the pratyahara, looking inwards, and kind of then that inward looking becomes a safe, guided, if you like, experience that they really need to learn how to do, because they're not really given the opportunity to do that. Because given, if any young person alone in their bedroom is most likely to be online, so in a yoga class, they are offline, they're with themselves, with their own bodies, and they're landing back into the home, which is their own body, which oftentimes is, they have an antipathetic relationship to. So they're looking at their bodies as something that needs to be controlled. It needs to be slimmer, it needs to be taller, it needs to be more attractive or whatever. And now they're coming into their bodies, they're inside their bodies. So often what I say in a yoga class with young people is, develop the inside mirror to look at yourself and see your beauty from the inside. Like what are your thoughts, what are your feelings, what are your sensitivities, what's your vulnerability? That is your beauty. It's not your jawline or the color of your eyes. That's just something that will change. It changes every single day. But to look for something that's constant within yourself, that can become your compass north, that rather than relying on the exterior, which is constantly changing and constantly demanding and constantly critical.
Would you say that that's the theme of your book that's going to be coming out next August, which is about teen yoga?
Yeah, what I've tried to do there is I've looked at the various levels of being as a teenager. So how can we help people socially? How can we help people physically? How can we help people mentally? And how can we help people spiritually? So the theme of the book is, very practical. So there's a kind of a theoretical, I put out my theory of exactly what you and I are talking about what's going on socially for young people. And then there's a practical application of yoga that might help and support those issues that are coming up within that realm. So it's a practical handbook, really. And it's everything that I've ever taught or ever learned or ever known, really trying to distill that into 60,000 words. I've really not held back. I really wanted people to know everything that I've understood and learned over the last 35 years and to bring that to young people in the most palatable and fun and funky way possible.
Are you expecting teenagers to read this, or are you expecting teachers and psychologists?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past them. I think there's a lot of teenagers who are incredibly intelligent, incredibly up for learning new stuff, and really, really fascinated by yoga and want to learn more. So I wouldn't put it past them. But it is actually directed, mostly because my publisher was quite keen on this, was directed towards what we would call yoga therapists. So people using yoga as a therapy, but within their own profession. So that would mean psychiatrists, pediatricians, educators, social workers, youth workers who use yoga as a therapy within their profession. Parents as well, actually. As
a grandparent of teenagers, I could see where that could be very helpful, because I do see them online constantly. If they're not on Facebook, they're playing games, because I have a lot of grandsons. And so I certainly could understand that I'm very impressed with that. It sounds like a really wonderful book, and I'll certainly mention it at the end for the contacts. Could you talk to me a little bit about this foundation? You said that you've been working on it for 10 years, and you've just incorporated it as a charity in 2016.
It's kind of it's a bit of a sweet personal journey, in the sense that I was just teaching yoga to young people in schools, and I just got too much work. And so I started just training people I thought would be good with young people to help me out. That's how it all started. And then I became headhunted by Special Yoga, which is a big organization in London, and they asked me to run the course through them in London. And then it just grew. But as I was training people to teach young people, I thought I really need to give them lots of support to do this, because it's such a new thing and lots of people don't need it. So I started kind of lobbying Parliament, and I started, creating lots of informational booklets and leaflets that they could take to the school, and so on and so on. And then after a few years, my partner comes in and says, look, everything you're doing is like charitable. Why don't you make it a charity? And I was like, oh, that's a new idea. So kind of like that. And then I was asked at the same time as he said that, I'd been asked to go to Africa and work with traumatized kids in orphanages who wanted to learn how to do yoga and breathing to help them with their, so in Sierra Leone, so to kind of support them so there wouldn't be any more war, is how they described it to me. And I was moved by them reaching out to me that I went. And so that kind of was a real trampoline for me to go, hey, yeah, he's right. You know, I'm doing a lot of charitable work, and I hadn't really seen it as that. So that's why we became charities. It's quite hard work. It takes a good year and a half to become a charity. And it takes you have to jump through a lot of hoops here in the UK, you know, to prove that the work is charitable and so on. So it took a long time for us to do that. And as soon as we did become a charity, it really focused my mind as to how we could help more, and how we could help young people, how we could help educators, how we could help a community at large, both in the UK and abroad, and how they can, you know, support themselves and empower themselves to control their emotions, control their minds, control their bodies in such a way that they can function better in society and overcome any disadvantages that they might have. And so that's become more and more my focus since the charity came into existence. But it's always been my focus, really.
And I noticed that you said you went to Sierra Leone, and you also are working in Kashmir.
Yeah. I mean, I was just being asked to go to Kashmir because Kashmir is a kind of, some people would consider a conflict zone, you know, between Pakistan and India, and has been for quite a while. And yet yoga belongs to this culture. So the organisation who's asked me to go feels very strongly that the young people could do with that, again, for similar reasons to the lady in the UAE, to kind of mitigate any aggressive experiences they're having towards each other, and to help them towards an inner peace, so to help towards an outer peace. We haven't got a date for Kashmir yet, so that's a bit on hold because the troubles, that they don't want me to go when it's too troublesome out there. But I'm going to Johannesburg in South Africa in October to work with people who work in the townships, because there's again a lot of aggression and a lot of discontent in South Africa. So again, it's about how do we teach people to just kind of channel their emotions into something creative and good, as opposed to repressing, or as opposed to expressing in a way that's going to damage them and their future. You know, so that's kind of my focus, is Africa has got so much potential. I feel, you know, I was born there, so I feel a strong affiliation with it. And I just feel that if they could allow themselves to come into a peaceful space and speak to each other, I think there could be a tremendous future for Africa. But I think as long as there's warring factions, as long as there's kind of reactivity, that is less likely to happen.
Is there a lot of yoga in Africa? I mean, has it been, I did talk to someone who, there was a charity that actually taught yoga to Africans so that they could teach other Africans that. And it was a way to have a job, you know, to have a career, to have, and so I think it sounds like it might be starting up, but is it widespread in Africa? Do you know?
The Africa Yoga, I think you're referring to Jean-Baptiste's Africa Yoga project, which is absolutely extraordinary. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, people the Baptiste lot are just doing such a great job, and they're training 20 to 25 people every month in most of African countries, as far as I can see. Definitely Nigeria and Kenya are very, very active with the yoga. It's hard to put my finger on. I'm not in touch with the Africa Yoga Project. I have nothing to do with them, but I'm sure they would have the statistics. But when I went to Sierra Leone, I was very, very positively surprised by how widespread it actually was. And you'd go down the beach and the Africans would be teaching each other, and they use it very much as a tool for their own empowerment, both physical and mental. And it's prevalent within the army. The army teaches it as part of their training program for the soldiers. I think we're going to be surprised in 10 years time. I think you're going to find it's going to be very prevalent throughout Africa and all the countries. I mean, if it's prevalent in Sierra Leone, which is one of the poorest countries in Africa, I'm pretty sure it's going to be prevalent in the other countries too. Yeah.
Well, that's great, isn't it? I would have never. I'd never think about it, to be honest with you. But I think that's really great. I was interested in something you said about teenagers, that it was on your website. I'm not sure that you actually said this, but that they are disembodied. And I think you mentioned that a little earlier, that they really aren't in tune or feel their body, which is obviously an issue. Do you think that's particularly for teenagers, or is it people that are older that are really involved in social media also?
That is something that's come up a lot, and it's an interesting question. And I'm very aware that we're generalizing here, and I know there are a lot of young people who are totally in touch with themselves and really switched on. But generally speaking, when we have our first kind of coming together session on the training courses, I ask people, what's your impression? And the psychologists particularly all use that word. All use that word. You know, every course they use the same word. They say, well, my impression is, and they put their hand above their head and they said, they're up here somewhere. They're disembodied, they're out of their bodies. And I say, oh, tell me more about that. And they'll go, their body is not their friend. You know, they're cutting their bodies. They have eating disorders. They want to look in a particular way. They're comparing their bodies to other people's bodies. It's not, don't have a friendly relationship with their own body. They're not inside themselves. They're looking at themselves from the outside, as you would if you spend a lot of time looking at photographs of yourself on media. You would end up looking at yourself from the outside rather than feeling yourself from the inside. I don't really know what that's like in the adult population, but I imagine, yeah, anybody focused on their exterior would end up being disembodied, in fact. And I think there's really long-reaching, far-reaching kind of results of that would be probably far less satisfying relationship with the opposite sex or with the same sex, that you feel you're not able to relate on a physical level with somebody else. You don't really know your emotions, you know, because a lot of our emotions, our feelings, you know, they emanate from the body, from the gut. So if we're disembodied, how do we know what we really feel about something, or if we're really joyful or really sad about something? If we're not in connection with our bodies, then we can't really be sure what we're feeling at any given moment, and then we can't express it, and then we can't get what we want. So then that leads to a kind of emotional ignorance, I think, and a kind of, physical ignorance as well, which can be very disappointing for the people when they're relating to others.
Especially with teenagers. I mean, I have vague memories of being a teenager, and it's such a difficult time just in general, because you're changing so much and everybody else is changing, and to then not really even be sure about yourself, that could be really very seriously frightening, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. You know, I mean, I think we all, the benefit we have in this field of talking about young people is that we've all been there, right? So we can all remember, you know, when suddenly, you know, your chest starts to grow or your hips start to grow, and you feel awkward in the space, you know. Yeah. So I think a physical practice which brings you back to your body and makes you aware of what's going on and makes you friendly towards your own body, it can be very, very powerful and empowering. But also the way we treat ourselves is the way we treat others, right? So if we can learn how to treat our bodies with respect and kindness and forgiveness, I know for some of us that's a lifelong practice, but then that's how we're also going to be, you know, acting towards others, and that's how we're going to be behaving towards others. And I think that's kind of probably the key as to why these guys in Sierra Leone saw such a strong link between inner peace and outer peace, is because they realized that it starts with self-acceptance. It starts with, how do I treat myself? And then that will emanate out into how I treat people I consider to be enemies, or people who I don't like. Yeah. So yeah, I think you're right. I think as our body changes, it's about accepting change and accepting my new self, you know, that is constantly day by day changing and has so many implications in terms of what does it mean to then become an adult and have responsibility in society, and all of those implications that come with that growth.
And none of those questions are easy, or they're pretty serious questions, so I can have some sympathy for them. I want to tell everyone about how to contact you, and I will, but is there anything that you would like to make sure that the listeners hear that we haven't covered yet?
Oh, well, I suppose it would be nice for everyone to know that we're just launching the beta version of our app. It's going to be called the Teen Yoga app. And I think that might be really helpful for anyone working with young people, anyone knows young people who'd like to just give yoga a go at home and not have to go to a class. That'll probably be available, I should say, 2019. We just do some recording for it now. And also, if there's any listeners out there who are young people who'd like to get involved with our foundation, they'd be very, very welcome to get in touch with us, because we have a small group of ambassadors of young people who love yoga, who kind of come together virtually. And I think that would be cool for everyone to join together and realize what a big, you know, group there is globally who do.
All right, I want to give these contact details. The website is www.teenyoga.com. The Instagram is Teen Yoga Mindfulness. Facebook is Teen Yoga Mindfulness. Twitter is Teen Yoga Global. And people can contact you through your website. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. I'm welcome. Anyone who wants to chat, anyone wants to get in touch for any reason whatsoever. We're always looking for donations and support as well, because obviously as a charity, we know we're living a bit from hand to mouth. It'd be wonderful if we could get some support as well, if anyone out there feels that this is a good thing to be doing.
Yes. Thank you so much, Charlotta. I really appreciate you talking to us. I think you've really given us a different view. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for asking me to come along. It's been really great speaking to you and hearing.
Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.